Number 5 on this list is El Chupacabra. You guys should know who El Chupacabra is by this point, considering we've talked about this creature tons on this channel before. Basically, it is a legendary creature in the Central Americas that's said to drink the blood of livestock. Although this creature seems like it's probably fake, it might be real, just not exactly how we might expect it to be. Carolyn Beccia says, "We are taught from an early age, don't approach scary looking dogs." And while no one can get a clear picture of Bigfoot, the Kraken, or the Loch Ness Monster, there is one monster that is oddly not camera shy: the legendary El Chupacabra. The Chupacabra was first sighted in Puerto Rico in the 70s. A wave of sightings followed in the late 1990s. During this time, livestock throughout Puerto Rico was found drained of blood. These Chupacabra, or goat sucker, attacks caused panic with local residents who claimed a vampire was feeding on their livestock. Although descriptions have varied, most describe a hairless, alien-like monster with spikes going down its back and glowing red eyes. It sounds dubious, but how could so many people be taking pictures of the same ugly dog-like creature? The answer may be one found in science. One plausible theory is that these creatures are coyotes suffering from sarcoptic mange, an inflammatory skin condition caused by the itch-inducing parasite mite scabies. Wolves, dogs, and coyotes infected with scabies will have extreme hair loss, skin shriveling, and constricted blood vessels that can lead to life-threatening fatigue. And while usually a coyote or wolf will have no problems hunting prey, once infected by sarcoptic mange, coyotes may choose to hunt more available meals such as livestock. So it's actually possible that this creature is real, it's just not what we thought at all. I know that this takes away from some of the mystery and lore around it, but ultimately this would make a lot of sense. When you think about it, what's more likely? A space alien comes crashing to Earth and starts sucking the blood of our livestock, or some coyotes get a disease and start doing it instead? I tend to side with the coyotes. Either way though, that doesn't make these coyotes nice or friendly or approachable. Still treat them like you would a chupacabra, with caution. Number 4 on this list is the Stymphalian birds. We gotta go all the way back to ancient Greece for this one. Caroline Beccia says, one of Hercules' labors was to kill the Stymphalian birds, man-eating birds who had the peculiar habit of throwing dung. The Greeks were not the only ones who liked to scare their youngsters with killer bird tales. The Maori tribe of New Zealand told similar legends of the Pokie or Haikoi, a giant black and white bird that swooped down from the sky to pick off small children. Scientists today know that these thunderbirds existed. Called Haast's eagle, the bird stood over 6 feet tall and had a wingspan of over 8 feet. The Haast eagle would sit atop trees and then ambush its prey by swooping down at 60-mile-per-hour speeds. Then it would disembowel its meal with sharp talons before the poor slob could even worry about dung throwing. Hercules would never have survived to these hellbirds, but you can sleep well tonight. The Haast's eagle went extinct around the 15th century. Anything that could annihilate Hercules would definitely be a no-go for me, guys. That dude was literally a demigod, and if these guys could have beaten him, then we wouldn't have stood a chance. Lucky for us, they are extinct now, but for the people back then, they would have had their hands full with these creatures. If, of course, they still had hands and the beast hadn't ripped them off yet. Number 3 on this list is the Kraken. We have one of the most famous folklore creatures here, guys, that, as we know now, turned out to be real. The Kraken was especially big in Norse culture. All of those people up there in the Nordic regions feared this wicked beast, as it was said to be able to pull down entire ships with hundreds of men on board. Instances where exactly that happened did actually transpire. Ships with tons of people on them that were literally made for battle would be out on the water, and then boom, Kraken attack and they're toasted. Except it wasn't really the Kraken now, was it? The Kraken looks very similar to an actual animal that we have in our world that is also super deadly and really strong. The giant squid. Giant squids, in case you couldn't tell from the name, are giant. They're pretty big. They are so big actually, they would have had the capability to take down an old ship like this. In fact, we've even seen these beasts do some serious damage to submarines, and they're made of metal. They easily could have sunk a wooden boat from hundreds or thousands of years ago. And if you were a sailor on said wooden boat and you saw this massive creature with several tentacles sucking you to the bottom of the ocean, then you would probably exaggerate what happened as well too. It's very easy to see how the legend of the Kraken got started and started to snowball as more encounters with the giant squid happened. I'm glad that the Kraken isn't technically real, because the giant squid is already bad enough. Number 2 on this list is the Charybdis. What was initially thought to be a folkloric creature may have been real, but not exactly in the way that we might think. Caroline Beccia says, "Nothing is more frightening than being sucked underwater by a whirlpool that feeds on human flesh 3 times a day." The Charybdis first appeared in Homer's Odyssey. During this epic tale, Odysseus must sail between the 6-headed sea monster Scylla and the flesh-eating whirlpool Charybdis. These 2 dueling sea monsters attacked in intervals, much like a whirlpool's regular intervals of tidal activity. It sounds terrifying, but whirlpools that pull ships underwater really do happen. Known today as Garofalo, one is found in the strait between Italy's mainland and Sicily. Garofalo occurs when winds blow across the strait in opposition to the tides. This makes it technically not a whirlpool because there's no circular motion, but it does have the ability to wreak havoc on ships and pull humans into a watery grave. So this deadly creature was real, it just ended up not being a creature at all. Back in the times when these stories were written, there would have been many folklore legends about evil sea monsters that could pull brave sailors into the sea. The reality of the situation is though that the ships we had back then kinda sucked, and it was a lot easier for the weather and other conditions to sink the ships. That's why there were so many legends of monsters coming from the ocean for so long. Finally, number 1 on this list is the Incubus demon. This demon is an evil demon who is thought to sneak into your home and have sexual relations with you as you're sleeping. This creature is real in a sense. It just so happens that it's actually in our minds. During the witch hunt craze of the 16th and 17th century, people had some really messed up ideas on how human reproduction occurred. One way was for a demon to steal a man's seed and impregnate a helpless woman during her sleep. The monster that stole the precious sperm was called a succubus, and the monster that implanted the sperm was called an incubus. The incubus would sit on top of your chest while you slept, making it impossible for you to move if you woke. Sort of like being assaulted by a possessed sexomniac. But before you condemn medieval people as crazed horn dogs trying to attack innocent women, there is a scientific basis for believing in such monsters. The condition is called sleep paralysis. During sleep paralysis, you are fully awake but cannot move or cry for help. It feels like you've had a stroke, but although it's terrifying, sleep paralysis is harmless. Most sleep experts attribute it to being caught between REM, rapid eye movement, and NREM, non-rapid eye movement sleep. Either way, before sleep stages were understood, we can see how our ancestors would have thought it was a demon sitting on your chest. So literally, this demon creature that apparently attacked people was never real at all. It just felt extremely real from our minds. I've experienced sleep paralysis before, and although I didn't experience any demon thing, I can 100% see how people would have believed this back then. It could definitely have felt like that and would have got people on the lookout for this sick and twisted demon of the night.
Number 5. Yuki-onna. Coming in first on our list is Yuki-onna, a deadly monster. Her name translates to Snow Woman, which is pretty fitting for a list about ice creatures. She goes by a few names, however, depending on who's telling the story. Sometimes it's swapped out for Yuki-onba, translating to Snow Grandma, or Yukinba, Snow Hag, depending on how nice you're feeling about her. She's a beautiful alabaster woman with pale, pale skin, and is the restless spirit of a woman who perished tragically in the snow and is unable to find any peace, and wanders the wilds, luring men away to their doom freezing, or going around causing blizzards and snowstorms to trap clueless travelers. Now there are several local variants on the story of Yuki Onna all across Japan, as it's an ancient myth dating all the way back to the 14th century. Most variants contain pretty similar elements. She's a tall, slender, gorgeous woman who's also completely ruthless. Some variations of her legend depict her as a wandering mother, carrying a child in her arms, and anyone who tries to endanger her child or take her child from her face her wrath. Most of these stories depict her as being cold in every sense of the word, feeling no remorse for her victims. Her reasons for hunting vary. Sometimes she does it to lure men away and seduces them with freezing kisses. Some say she does it just because. But you know what? I think I could fix her. She's known to spare people on occasion, so she's got some heart beating inside that cold exterior. I'm sure if we got to know each other, I could melt her heart just a little bit. Hey, like the scares? Want to hear more about more monsters every day? Well, then you're at the right place. Just subscribe to Top 5 Scary and we'll keep it up for you. Number 4, Barbagazi. I'm including these guys because while researching for this video, I found out about them for the first time and immediately became obsessed with these little goofs. They're not super scary, but this is the kind of thing that I think the world will be a lot better for if we all know about. The Barbagazi is a French variant of a gnome, a squat little humanoid with giant feet, covered in white hair and long pointed ears, and an even longer white beard frozen with clumps of ice and icicles, explaining their name. Barbagazi is a broken telephone translation of the French words barbe and glacé, translating to frozen beards. So they're frosty little gnomes, they're like little elves. They don't make any toys, but they do like to play, and they use their gigantic hobbit-like feet to ski down mountains. They surf avalanches. These guys rule. These guys are just adorable little adrenaline-chasing snow gnomes. Snomes? As a nice change of pace from the usual monsters and the rest of this list, the Barbagazi really just want to chill, pun extremely intended. They help shepherds find their flocks, they help lost travelers find their way home, and honestly they'd probably help you move if you asked. These adorable big feet live in tunnels deep beneath the mountains, in vast networks of interconnected caves and secluded villages where they hibernate for years when the climate doesn't suit them. They live up in the Alps on the border of Switzerland and France, which is maybe where their good nature comes from. That famed Swiss neutrality means they're not going around dooming anybody the way Yuki Onna is. There's not too much folklore around these guys, and really everything I've just said to you is about everything I could find on them personally, but I absolutely loved the concept of the skiing snow gnomes, so here they are. I hope you like them even a quarter as much as I did. Number 3, Ijirak. Okay, we've had enough pleasant, cute little myths. So let's get back to the scary ones. The Ijirak, translating to shapeshifter, is a doomed creature born out of a cruel fate. Born out of a human being who wandered too far out into the cold and found themselves caught between the worlds of life and death, trapped to forever wander between the line. It's a shapeshifter that can take any form that it pleases, but it's never able to mask its signature trademark, its glowing, sinister red eyes. When it's in its most natural form, it does resemble a human, although a bit of a twisted one, as its eyes are contorted sideways, as well as his mouth, disfigured past the point of recognition of a regular mouth. It's said that you can only ever gaze upon an Ijirak from out the corner of your eye, for if you look at them directly, it'll disappear from your vision, as if it was never really there. It's said that they target out travelers specifically, luring lost, wayward souls to try to convert the living into joining them in their land of the undead. And as well, they prey on lost children secluded from their families to drag them away and steal them. It's best to steer completely clear out of any territory Ijirak are said to inhabit, as no matter how well versed you are with your environments and your tracking ability, once you've made yourself exposed to the presence of an Ijirak, you're bound to become ensnared in its trap eventually and lose your way. That's why they build the Nukshuks to help the children find their way back home if they're able to convince an Ijirak to let them go. Now it's said if you do encounter one, and if you survive, you will barely be able to remember what happened, with all of it seeming like a fleeting, distant dream. Number 2, Yeti. Now you had to guess that if we were going to do a list of icy creatures, that the abominable snowman would be making a snow-stopping appearance. Snow-stopping? Like show-stopping? Yeah, you kind of get it, you know what I mean. Yetis are like the snow monster. Did you know Yeti actually means snowman in Nepalese? Now don't say you don't learn anything from any of these videos. The creature is a tall, bipedal, ape-like creature, like a winterized variant of Bigfoot, said to roam the Himalayas. Much like the elusive Sasquatch, there have been many numerous reported sightings over the years, although it could be possible that a lot of these are just people seeing bears and it's kind of snowy out and it's hard to tell what's going on. But there could also be an inconspicuous ape-like species lurking around in the mountains, just out of reach of human eyes. I'm willing to hear all options on this. It's one of the oldest myths to mountain-dwelling peoples, and there are countless local variations and spins on the creature and its fables. It's actually fascinating. I had no idea how many variants of Yetis there are across so many different cultures. It appears across multiple cultures, a recurring element in several mythologies. Yeti is hardly the only name it goes by. A couple other Tibetan names for this creature include Mish, which means man-bear, Migo, translating to wild man, and Bunmanshi, which is Nepali for jungle man. It goes without saying that abominable snowman is not the indigenous name for it, but rather a name dubbed to it by British officers in the 1920s who were fascinated by stories of the creature. It's a bit of a misnomer because most cultures actually view the Yeti as a bit more of a benevolent being than any of those names might suggest, with some cultures viewing them as descendants of gods or divine beings, or see them as an intelligent species that just wants to be left alone and respected, driven to near extinction from hunters. And I can respect that. Let these beautiful creatures just vibe out there. And finally, at our #1 spot is my personal favorite northern winter cryptid, sometimes called the Wendigo, but most commonly known as the Wendigo. The Wendigo is a vengeful, malevolent spirit, originating from plains, Great Lakes, and First Nations people based around the east coast of Canada. Is that why I included the Wendigo up at #1? Very possibly. Like pretty much all mythological creatures, there's no set truth or one story about the Wendigo, and countless local variations exist on it. Depictions of Wendigos range from a humanoid, emaciated, nasty-looking creature, a bit like me, although somewhere down the line, it became very popular to depict the Wendigo as a bipedal monster with a deer's skull in place of a head. In some Ojibwe and Cree lore, the Wendigo is described as being massive, towering over humans, although this trait seems to be unique to those stories. It's said that Wendigos maintain their faculties from when they were human, able to communicate, speak, to be able to better lure prey or taunt and threaten their targets. Common to all depictions of the Wendigo, though, is that it's a malevolent, vengeful spirit which takes over humans. It's sometimes thought to be the embodiment of human greed and gluttony, and invokes an insatiable lust for hunger, and oftentimes a devouring desire for human flesh. Some variants of the Wendigo myth say that a starving human who succumbs to their darkest desires and consumes human flesh will find themselves transforming into a Wendigo. Other times, it's said merely being around the presence of one will slowly cause you to turn. It's thought that Wendigo myths originate as a means to encourage cooperation among people. For if you're overcome by your own greed or foolishly venture off by yourself, you'll descend and turn into one of these vicious creatures and only end up serving damage to your community. Now, for whatever reason, we are fascinated as a culture by Wendigos. We just love these guys. They pop up all the time. There's a Marvel character named Wendigo based off the myth who I'm sure is getting a 10-episode Disney Plus series as I speak. Wendigos appear as the central antagonist of the video game Until Dawn, appearing as pale, emaciated creatures born out of flesh consumption and living in the mountains. And recently, the 2021 horror film Antler centered around a Wendigo as its main antagonist. We seem to always be hungry for more Wendigo content. Nothing ironic about that.
#5 on this list is Moby Dick. Even if you haven't personally sat down and read the famous story of Captain Ahab and his hated rival, Moby Dick, I feel like everybody has at least heard of the story. Well, turns out it might not be completely fictional. What culture says, Moby Dick isn't a myth in the traditional sense of the word, as he's the bane of Captain Ahab's existence in his book by Herman Melville. Still, the idea of a vengeful and vindictive whale has permeated the modern zeitgeist as the target of one's obsession, which is mythical in its own right. In 1820, Captain George Pollard Jr. was in command of the Essex when it was sunk by a whale. He survived and returned to Nantucket, where he was given the two brothers to captain, but after 2 years he crashed it on a coral reef and was thereafter determined to be unlucky at sea. Pollard's troubles with the Essex came from an 85-foot albino sperm whale, which directly attacked and smashed into the ship. The whale returned to attack the vessel at greater speed, and the Essex began taking on water, leaving the men to flee. Pollard was away from the vessel when the attack occurred. When he returned shortly after the whale slammed into the vessel a second time, he saw his first mate, Owen Chase, who told told him we have been stove by a whale, and with that, the legend that would become Moby Dick was born. So, Moby Dick, literally this super famous story that always seemed to be fictional, turns out to be based on something 100% real. Now, I know that Moby Dick wouldn't necessarily be classified as a myth per se, but I think it's close enough. Also, RIP to my dude Captain George Pollard Jr. He literally suffered so much on the sea and was thought of as such a bad ship captain that he inspired one of the most famous stories literally ever. Number 4 on this list is dire wolves. For those fans of Game of Thrones, this one should stand out to you. What culture says in games like Dungeons and Dragons or television series such as Game of Thrones, dire wolves have been depicted as gigantic wolves capable of easily taking down a large man. They are often described as vicious, hard to train, and efficient killers, but the myth of the dire wolf doesn't exactly line up with reality. Dire wolves were real animals, which went extinct about 9,500 years ago when the last major ice age came to an end. Dire wolves weren't gigantic monsters, but they were big animals. Most specimens that have been studied show the dire wolf to be about the same size as modern gray wolves. They weighed around 132 pounds and were capable predators. Their teeth were larger and had a better shearing ability than their modern cousins. They had the strongest bite force at the point of the canine of all canis species. This made it possible for them to prey on horses, camels, mastodon, bison, and humans living during the Ice Age. It's likely tales of their ferocity gave life to the mythological abilities of the animal, which persists today. Sadly, dire wolves are long gone, even if they do sometimes pop up in our nightmares. So the legend of dire wolves has been exaggerated a little bit, but it's all based on fact. I would imagine that our ancestors from 10,000 years ago really had their hands full when it came to these things. That's probably how the legend all started. We were getting shredded by these dire wolves back in the day, and then through word of mouth it just kept getting passed on through the generations that these are big creatures. Thankfully nowadays we just have regular wolves that we have got to worry about. Number 3 on this list is the platypus. Okay, so we have had a lot of scary creatures on this list already, but I just had to throw the platypus on here as well. The platypus, for those who don't know, is a very real animal that still exists today. But back in the day, people didn't think that it could possibly be real. What culture says the myth of the platypus is an interesting one due to the obvious fact that the creature exists. But what we know now and what people believed in Europe in the 18th century, that's a different story. The platypus was first described by Captain John Hunter in 1798. Hunter sent a platypus pelt and a sketch of the animal to Britain, which was a common thing for sailors and naturalists to do when they found a new species. Unfortunately, the naturalists in Britain didn't believe the animal could possibly exist, and as a result, a myth grew surrounding a very real animal. So for a long time, no one thought that the platypus was an actual thing. They had it chalked up as a myth for years until more and more people saw it and it was proven to be real. They are absolutely weird looking animals, so I understand why people may have thought this. Like, let's face it guys, there really isn't a whole lot of animals out there that look like a platypus. Anyways, for quite a while this was thought of in the same vein as dragons or other mythical creatures. Number 2 on this list is imugi. This was actually a mythical creature that I wasn't familiar with until researching this video. Imugi are Korean dragons which resemble all forms of Chinese dragons. They are often depicted as long, snake-like reptiles with 4 legs. Unlike European dragons, imugi do not have wings and are considered benevolent creatures related to water and agriculture. While there is no such creature in the fossil record, there is something similar called the Titanoboa. Titanoboa was the largest snake to ever slither across the ground, and various specimens have been found indicating they could grow up to 42 feet in length and weigh as much as 2,500 pounds. It's highly unlikely anyone in Korea would have ever seen the bones of a Titanoboa, as the creature's range was throughout the rainforests of what is now South America. They died out around 58 million years ago, so the comparison between the myth and reality is is entirely coincidental. Like most dragon myths, the Imugi likely arose from ancient people who found bones belonging to the extinct species. Korean findings that gave rise to the myth of dragons likely came from marine reptiles or dinosaur fossils. Additionally, tall tales spread about creatures like Imugi until they explode into mythological beasts. Titanoboa is something we have talked about on this channel before. The sheer strength and power these beasts would have had is almost unimaginable. It's believed that they used to eat crocodiles and alligators like they were nothing. Think about that, guys. Just chowing down on one of the biggest reptiles in the world as if it was a light snack. Maybe the Chinese caught wind that these creatures existed back in the day, and that's what sparked the myths of the Imugi. Number 1 on this list is the roc. I love eagles and birds of prey. I think that they are super cool, but this is a bit too much. The roc is an enormous bird of prey found in mythology originating in the Middle East. The giant bird was popularized in various fairy tales and folklore from the region, and there's a roc in 1001 Nights, as well as many other popular stories. Marco Polo recounted his identification of a roc in the 13th century. It was for all the world like an eagle, but one indeed of enormous size, so big in fact that its quills were 12 paces long and thick in proportion. And it is so strong that it will seize an elephant in its talons and carry him high into the air and drop him so that he is smashed to pieces, having so killed him. The bird swoops down on him and eats him at leisure. The roc, as it has been described, didn't likely exist, but there are analogs in the fossil records which could easily have given birth to the myth. One such creature was the elephant bird of Madagascar, though the myth could have easily been born by sailors' accounts of large eagles capable of carrying off newborn lambs. Marco Polo, last I checked, is a pretty reputable dude, so I'm gonna take what he has to say pretty seriously. Clearly, he was super scared of what this beast could do, and if he was so scared, that kinda makes me scared as well. Nowadays, we know that these would have just been the birds from Madagascar or just great eagles. So this myth was kind of real, just not exactly how we thought.
Number 5. The Rolling Rock. Tesei Nagahi, otherwise known as the Traveling Stone or the Rolling Rock, was the result of his mother using a stone for relief. He was an enormous round boulder that would wait for members of the tribe to come by before hurling itself at them. If it saw someone in the distance, it would chase them in a relentless pursuit, not stopping until it had run them over, crushed them, and killed them. Nyanezgani knew about the Rolling Rock's tactics and used his mystical colored knives to stack the odds in his favor. As he approached the rock's lair, he planted his black knives in the ground. As he got closer, he planted his blue knives and his yellow ones in the intervals during his approach. When the Traveling Stone saw the hero, he took off after him, hoping to crush and kill him. As it rolled over the knives, slivers of itself were sheared off, with each different fragment becoming a new pigment. The stone from its bones became white rock, its flesh blue pigment, its hair black, its blood red, and yellow ochre coming from its intestines. Nyanezgani used his lightning arrows, which were a gift from the sun god, to chase the Rolling Rock all the way to the San Juan River, taking off pieces as he went, making the rock unrecognizable. The creature begged for mercy and promised to remain in the rivers, where it would keep the mountain springs open so that the Dene could have fresh water. Nyanezgani agreed, and the stone took on the form of an otter with buffalo horns, known as the Water Monster, who was a well-loved and friendly creature from that point on. Number 4. The Evil Eyes. The B'nai Ahani were the result of their mother's unnatural practice with a cactus, which may be the scariest thing on this entire list. They were limbless, round creatures with a tapering end who stayed in the location where they were abandoned by their terrified mother. You know, because of the lack of limbs. They had depressions in their heads that looked like eyes, but they were the definition of if looks could kill, as they could shoot lightning out of them to shock and kill their prey. They used Magpie as their spy, and together the two creatures had offspring of a similar make and disposition. Nyanezgani prepared for battle with the B'nai by bringing his armor and a large bag of salt. He found the twins and their offspring and was attacked. They tried to hit him with their lightning, but the hero's armor deflected it. He threw the salt in a fire, and the resulting sparks blinded the creatures, allowing him to attack. In some versions he killed the creatures, and in others he transformed them into cacti, but he spared two of the children. He decided to make them useful to his people, and turned one into a screech owl, whose job it was to warn the Dene of future events and imminent dangers. He transformed the other into a whippoorwill, in order to make things more more beautiful and the earth more happy. Number 3. The kicking monster. When Set Ahatsitali was born, his mother was so disgusted with him that she took him to a cliff where she put him in a hole which she covered with a stone. But he escaped and survived on the cliffside. He had no head, having only a long pointed end where it should have been. It had long, powerful legs and long hair that grew into the rock, anchoring him to the cliffside. He had several monstrous children of his own who would wait at the bottom of the cliff to be fed. The cliff was near an assortment of fruiting cacti, so many people would come by hoping to get something to eat. As they walked the cliffside, the creature would wait with his legs folded up until the passerby tried to pass in front of him. At that point, he would kick the traveler off the side, where they would tumble down to the bottom, where they would be ruthlessly devoured by the kicking monster's children. When Nyanezgani found him, he was prepared, and as he passed the strange creature, he was able to dodge its kick. The hero asked the creature why he was trying to kick him, and the monster insisted that it was just stretching its legs. It then tried to kick him 3 more times. There is some variation in the versions of this story that I found. In one, the hero is kicked off the cliff and loses his weapons, but is able to grab the monster by the hair and push him down the cliff while saving himself. In another, he dodges all the kicks, stabs the monster to death, cuts the anchoring hair, and sends him down the cliff where he is devoured by its hungry children, who the hero transformed into sheep, owls, turtles, or buzzards depending on the telling. Number 2. Yetso. With a name meaning big monster, you knew this one was going to be bad. Yetso was the most powerful and most feared of the Inai. As the son of a woman and a stone, he was covered with valuable rocks and minerals, with turquoise around his neck, white shell on his shoulder, an agate disc on his head, and scaly flint armor like knives covering most of his body. He had a basket of lightning bolts and was so large that each of his steps stretched as far as a man could walk from sunrise to noon. He had been hunting Nyanezgani and his twin brother, Tobadzisseni, since they were infants. But thankfully the twins were well hidden by their mothers, who hid the kids and told the giants that their footprints had been made by her in an effort to not be so lonely. As adults, the twins went after the giant, finding him drinking a lake dry in 4 gulps, and being so large that his body was above both the eastern and southern hills. The twins were spotted by the giant, who began to taunt them. They returned his taunts and soon made him furious. The giant threw lightning at them, but they were able to easily dodge while riding on a rainbow. They hit him with lightning of their own, which caused his armor to shatter, and the giant collapsed dead onto the ground. The twins scalped the giant and threw the head to the east, where it became the Kabzon Peak. Knowing that if his blood reached any of the other monsters he would be revived, the twins dug trenches, which explains the ridges and cliffs of volcanic rock near Kabzon Peak today. The Dene used his scales to make armor, knives, and arrowheads. Number 1. Skinwalkers. Moving away from the Dene, we have the most infamous of the Dene legends, the Skinwalker. Legend says that they are Dene medicine men and women who became corrupted by their power and have developed the ability to shapeshift into the form of an animal. They take the form of monstrous bears, wolves, and coyotes, among other predators. They are almost impossible to kill, save for with a white ash-covered bullet. In order to become a Skinwalker, one must be inducted by a secret society, with the initiation being the committing of an extremely evil deed, such as killing a sibling or other family member. Upon completion, they are granted their transformation powers and wear the skins of the animals they transform into, hence the name. Sometimes they are also described as wearing animal skulls or antlers on their heads. This is why the Dene consider it taboo to wear the pelts of predatory animals. Other powers include the ability to possess and control people. They are known to engage in acts such as grave robbing and cannibalism, just to name some of the more tame acts. This creature has transcended indigenous folklore and has managed to make its way into the mainstream lexicon, having appeared in novels by Stephen King, episodes of The X-Files, and several episodes of the television program Supernatural. Although many creatures from folklore across the world are capable of indescribable destruction, few are as disturbing or interesting as the creatures featured in the legends of the Dene tribe. We'd like to thank abookofcreatures.com for providing much of the information and images sourced for this video.